Shuckalugga kapow! How's it going, old schoolers? You are kicking it at Old School at Russell JS, and I am your host, Russell JS. I got another track by track, album versus album. This is going to be a wild one right here, friends. Let me tell you, I am putting two classic albums up against each other from two of the greatest bands that ever were. And what makes these albums, hold on. What makes these albums to be great? These two albums, well, they're great to me. Some may disagree with me, others may agree with me. But the thing is, both these albums were they were the debut of a replacement frontman. And like I said, two legendary bands are going to duke it out tonight. What am I talking about? I have Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell versus Van Halen 5150. Now, I know what some of you diehard so-called purists of Van Halen are going to say. Oh my God, Van Hagar. Oh, he ruined Van Halen. No, Eddie did that. Okay, I mean, Eddie, well, he didn't necessarily ruin his own band. He was experimenting because you see, when you think back to the 80s, Van Halen debuted in 1978 with their first album when David Lee Roth was the vocalist. And it was all about Eddie's guitar and Alex's drumming, Michael Anthony's bass playing, and of course, Diamond Dave. Or should I say arrogant Diamond Dave? I mean, I don't hate David Lee Roth. I mean, sure, I steer towards the Hagar era more than I do the original era. And it's because when 5150 dropped, I mean, I was getting into hard rock by 86, 87 when I was a little kid, not knowing who the bands were for the moment. I mean, I discovered them as I discovered, the bands, who they were at that point. I mean, I would probably hear Jump when I was, say, 6 years old, okay, when 1984 happened and Roth was still in the band. But I didn't know who it was at the time. I just heard it. I heard the synthesizers. It was the 80s, man. The Reagan era, DeLoreans, Ghostbusters and Gremlins and E.T. all at the theater, right? And cartoons like Inspector Gadget and Transformers, which would all have a toy line of sorts. I mean, it was just a far out radical era of the time. And what happened was Eddie, you see, his original fan base was growing up and they were looking towards, a new direction, he was looking to do a musical direction because his original fan base was growing up and they kind of did the thing like what Rush did. I mean, Geddy Lee, not only was he a massive bass player, but he was also he was awesome on the keyboards, and he went ahead and incorporated synthesizers and, electric keyboards into Rush's music. And that's what makes Rush the ultimate powerhouse they are today. Like Van Halen is the ultimate powerhouse themselves in their own right. But Eddie knew that his audience was growing and they were going into different ventures in music. And not only that, he wanted to gain a younger audience for the 1980s because when Van Halen 1 and everything from Van Halen 1 up to 1984, when those albums were released, in 1978, the little kids, the kids that were between the ages of 7 to 10 years old, they were going to be future fans. So Eddie had to go ahead and incorporate all that. And the same thing with Black Sabbath. I mean, Black Sabbath with Heaven and Hell, that's when Ozzy departed. They parted ways and they gained Ronnie James Dio. And it's ironic how, like, a lot of these bands who replaced you know, key members, due to death or, turmoils, whatever it was that was tearing the band apart where there had to be a change. I mean, nobody cried about Brian Johnson replacing Bon Scott. As a matter of fact, when Brian Johnson became the new frontman for AC/DC after Bon Scott's tragic passing, AC/DC was even a bigger powerhouse than what they were. They came out with the Back in Black album. Same thing with Kiss. When, you had Eric Carr's debut on Music from the Elder. And in 1983, by 1983, Ace Frehley had left the band, just like Peter Criss did. And they had Eric Carr and Vinnie Vincent for the lead guitar player and the lead drummer. And you know what? Kiss continued on. But the main topic is Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, and Van Halen 5150, which are the debut of a new lead singer. Now, when Black Sabbath replaced Ronnie James Dio, Ozzy Osbourne with Ronnie James Dio, Dio was fresh off the band Rainbow. And Ozzy would go on and he'd become a successful solo artist in his own right. But these albums right here, I still say, even without their original frontmen, they still kick. They still rule. So without further ado, let's see how these bad Oscars rank out, shall we? Okay, in the case of Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell versus Van Halen 5150. Now this is going to really hurt because, there's songs that I really love that I'm pinning against one another, and I don't know. We'll see it at the end of the video. Okay, here we go. Neon Knights versus Good Enough. Hello, baby. Now, they're good heavy hitters in my opinion. They both rule. And you know what? I couldn't pin one against the other, so I have to give both Black Sabbath and Van Halen a point. Children of the Sea versus Why Can't This Be Love? Not a big fan of Why Can't This Be Love, so Black Sabbath wins that one. Lady Evil versus Get Up. Oh man, they both rock hard. They both rock solid, so I'm giving them each a point. Now, to bear in mind this also, Heaven and Hell has 8 tracks and 5150 has 9 tracks. And also, I've almost forgot, if you're new to the channel, hit a like, subscribe, leave comments down in the box below, ring that bell for notifications for future videos to pop up. Okay, back to the game. The title track for Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell. Heaven and Hell versus Dreams. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Yeah. I mean, Dreams gets a lot of airplay. Heaven and Hell does not. And I love them both. So you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give them each a point. Some of you are going to say, oh, Heaven and Hell is a better track. Dreams is a wussy track. Well, that's your opinion and you're entitled to it if that's how you feel. Okay, Wishing Well versus Summer Nights. I've known that song for so long. I'm not a big fan of Wishing Well, so I have to give it to Van Halen. All right, let's see. Die Young versus Best of Both Worlds. What can I say? I love them both. And you know what? They both get a point. And you know what? Both these albums right now are at a tie. Walk Away versus Love Walks In. Yeah, that's Van Halen trying to do a ballad. I didn't really care for it because it had too much of the synthesizer keyboards, and I'm going to talk about this after this competition is over. I'm giving Black Sabbath that point. And now, let's see. Lonely Is the Word versus 5150. What can I say? I got to go with Lonely. Lonely Is the Word. And I love them both, so therefore they're both getting a point. And now, since there's only 8 tracks to Heaven and Hell and 9 to Inside. I'm going to say Blank Space versus Inside. You know what? Oh, heck. I'm not going to even do the Blank Space one. So, and I don't like the song Inside. So guess what? Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell with 8 points up against, 7 points up against Van Halen 5150 with 6. So, what does that mean? Ha 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 ha. Now, I'm sure a lot of you Van Halen fans that are more the Roth era than you are the Hagar era, you're going to be happy with this because guess what? Yes, that's right. Here you go. Here's the end result right here. Black Sabbath, winner. And you know what? I hope that some Van Halen fans are happy about that, and I hope Black Sabbath fans are happy about that as well. Now, to get to the thing, like when I said Eddie knew that his audience was growing up and he was going to be getting a younger audience, he had to go ahead and incorporate something, so he did the whole synthesizer thing, which Eddie Van Halen, he was a classically trained pianist because his and Alex's father, Mr. Van Halen, was a jazz musician. You know, he was a jazz musician in their native Holland. And the thing is, Eddie got started on piano, and then he moved his way to drums, and Alex would take over the drums, and then he went on to guitar. And now Eddie is, even in death, he is one of the greatest guitar players of all time. You know, in a way, it kind of reminds me of Alan Lanier from Blue Oyster Cult. You see, Alan Lanier, he also played guitar and he played keyboards. And like I said, I mentioned Geddy Lee of Rush and John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin as well. He played bass and he played electric organ. And you know what? In my opinion, when an artist decides to, try something new, try new concepts, I'm on board with it, see what it's all about. I mean, a lot of people didn't like when Kiss took off the makeup in 1983, but they had no choice. I mean, they claimed that it wasn't going to work with different people. Ironically enough, years later, when Ace and Peter would leave the band the second time around, they would go ahead and recruit former Kiss drummer Eric Singer from the Revenge era, and also their stage manager Tommy Thayer, who played lead guitar in a band called Back in Blue, and he was also an Ace Frehley performer in a Kiss tribute band. And I gotta say, as a Kiss fan, I tried to like it. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. I mean, okay, I get it. After the reunion tour, the Psycho Circus tour, and the farewell tour, Kiss felt like, okay, what more can we do? 70s Kiss sells. So let's go ahead and we'll put 2 other guys in Ace and Peter's makeup if they don't want to continue on. And, I'm one of those fans that refers to Kiss nowadays as half Kiss, half tribute band. And I do refer to Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer as fake Frehley and cheater Chris, like a lot of people do. I mean, Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer, don't get me wrong, they're great musicians in their own right, but they should have, if Gene and Paul wanted to continue the band with 2 different guys and keep it the makeup era, they should have, let them pick out their own personas. Because all 4 of those personas were made with heart back in 1973. Because, Gene was in the monster movies, Peter Criss had a pet cat, Ace Frehley was into science fiction, and Paul Stanley was obsessed with stars. So it gelled together. And Eric Carr, he wanted to be a fox, and Vinnie Vincent's Ankh Warrior makeup, that came at last minute. But, in many ways, people don't seem to understand. David Lee Roth did not like the whole synthesizer concept, because this is where I say Roth is arrogant, and all you Sammy Hagar haters out there, You criticize me all you want, like we all have our own opinions. I'm not going to get offended. Just in the comments section, just don't say anything nasty or demeaning. Otherwise, I'll delete your comment. But the thing was, you see, Dave was not a big fan of Eddie wanting to contribute synthesizers like he did in 1984, and he would do it in 5150 and OU812. And they got into an argument about it, and Eddie said, hey, look, man, this is my band, not yours. You're just the front man. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. And you know what? They had a big fight, and Eddie said, all right, that's it. You know what, Dave? Goodbye. You're gone. Now, I don't care who's the front man of Van Halen, David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar, as long as not Gary Sharon from Extreme. How do you like that? Sherry Garone from Extreme. But, Van Halen 3, I'm going to review that album pretty soon. I hope you enjoyed this album versus album, track by track. That's all the time I have for this vlog. And remember, keep it real, keep it fresh, keep it chill. Listen to old school music, play old school video games, watch old school TV shows, watch old school movies. Live it, love it, feel it. Get you enough of love, get you enough of peace, tranquility, all the goodness in the world. Get you enough of less drama, get you enough of no drama, get you enough of less chaos, get you enough of no chaos. Godspeed. May the force be with you always. And also remember to, if you like what you see, subscribe. Leave comments in the box down below, and hit a like and ring the bell for notifications. And as always, I like to say, Godspeed, may the force be with you always, and shaka-laka kapow!